Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Live at 5. I hope that you're all having a wonderful day today and figuring out the new Instagram update where the live button has changed location. I am Kevin Adkisson, the curator for the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research. And today, this week's Live at 5 is going to be discussing one of my favorite pieces here at the Frank Lloyd Wright Smith House, the Paul Evans Credenza. And the Smith House was, of course, completed in 1950, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. It was the home of Melvin Maxwell and Sarah Stein Smith, who lived here until Mr. Smith passed away in 1984, and then Sarah in 2005. And in the late 1960s, their son had gone off to college. They had lived in the house for almost 20 years, and they decided that they wanted to expand the home. And so when you come on a tour today, you are seeing most of Frank Lloyd Wright's original architecture, except for this addition that was added in 1968. This room was designed by William Wesley Peters, who was Frank Lloyd Wright's main apprentice and assistant at Taliesin. Peters was also Frank Lloyd Wright's son-in-law. And on Sunday, I will be delivering, along with our colleagues and friends at Docomomo, Michigan, which is a modern architectural preservation group. We are having a celebration of the 1970s turning 50. And so on Sunday in Sunday afternoon, we are doing a special program all about Southeast Michigan in the 70s. So sign up for that at center.cranbrook.edu. It's a two-part event. The first part is at Bolero, the 1970s bowling alley in Royal Oak. And then the second half will be here at the Smith House. But I thought today for Live at 5, in celebration of the 70s turning 50, we would talk about a little piece that really makes this room, and which is one of the best pieces at the Smith House and one of the best pieces at Cranbrook. And that is this magnificent Paul Evans Credenza. And this piece is made out of mixed metals, but it's predominantly patinated steel. And Paul Evans is actually was a student at Cranbrook Academy of Art. And this is part of a series of furniture that he started around 1960 and really ramped up production in 1965 and then continued manufacturing pieces like this into the 1970s. And when I decided to do our Live at 5 about Paul Evans, I was thinking about, okay, well, what do I know about this piece? And what is the date? And I looked in the computer record and it just said mid-20th century. And I thought, okay, well, that's a pretty good guess of most things at the Frank Lloyd Wright Smith House. And so as we were doing more research, I realized that a lot of these pieces are signed. And so I thought that we could spend some time today with the camera attempting to find Paul Evans' signature. Now, before we get to that happy hunt, I want to tell you a little bit more about Paul Evans. He was a metalsmith and furniture maker who made really exquisite pieces such as this that were almost like art objects. He thought if people were buying handmade pieces, then they should look like they're made by hand. He had nothing against clean lines, but he said clean lines could be made by a machine. So if you were making it by hand, make it show the hand. And he liked to design not just the piece, not just the credenza, but then all of the implements, so platters and candlesticks and the like. He was a Quaker, and he was born in the Philadelphia area in 1931. He studied at the George School, which was a preparatory school in eastern Pennsylvania, and he studied woodworking and design. He went to Philadelphia College of Art for just a brief moment, and then he decided to apprentice with his uncle, Ed Truitt, who was a silversmith in Belleville, New Jersey. Evans' own mother was a painter. His father was the headmaster of the George School. After he was apprenticing in fine silver, he decided to go and he studied at the Rochester Institute of Technology School of American Craftsmen. And that school, he had a fellowship from Aileen Vanderbilt Webb. And Mrs. Webb, she's famous among the Webbs, what is her name? Havemeyer Webb, the founder of Shelburne Farms. It's her sister. And so the Webbs were really involved in early American craft and in reviving handcraftedness. So Paul Evans goes off to Rochester, where he studies at the School of American Crafts, and he studies metalsmithing on a fellowship from Mrs. Webb. When at the end of his training, he applies to Cranbrook. And in his application to Cranbrook, he said that he was attracted to the Cranbrook Academy of Art Library. He wanted to learn more about hollowware and flatware, as well as inlay. And he studied at Cranbrook on a Ellen Scripps Booth Scholarship for Jewelry and Metalsmithing. He was one of over 1,000 applicants for the Booth Scholarship that year. And he would have been studying with Richard Thomas, who was the long head of the metalsmithing department from 1948 to 1984. And in Paul Evans's application to Cranbrook, he says that he was looking for a personal program to learn all he could about fine metalworking with the hope of making a contribution to the contemporary tradition in this area. And he was pretty critical of metalsmithing at the time when he wrote that it is unfortunate that the control of metalsmithing is by the traditionalist in design. And so I think he wanted to go and really make a new name for himself in metalsmithing. While here, he would have been working alongside people like Julia Schmidt, who became the head of sculpture at Cranbrook and who worked in iron and did really crazy iron sculptures that are pretty similar to Evans's work. But he was also working alongside the sort of main founders of Cranbrook. So Saarinen was passed away by 52. Millis was back in Sweden. But Evans would have still been in the same area as Maya Grotel and Zoltan Zepeshy and Wally Mitchell and Marian Strangel. He would also have been around Ted Luderowski and Robert Snyder. And so he's there in that critical years right after the Booths and the Saarinens and the Millises are all out of the picture. Now, he only stayed at Cranbrook for 8 months. The Booth Fellowship was a 1-year fellowship to study at Cranbrook, but he had left his wife and their young son out in Massachusetts, and he decided that he was going to return to become the head silversmith at Old Sturbridge Village. I don't know if you've ever been to Old Sturbridge Village, but it is a sort of like colonial Williamsburg, but even more kind of dedicated to austerity. And so he was a contemporary craftsman. He had to live in Old Sturbridge Village. He could have no modern implements visible, and that included tricycles for the children. That's why they fired the last silversmith. He worked there until 1955, when he set up his own company at that point in New Hope, Pennsylvania. And so he headed out to New Hope, Pennsylvania, and he began exhibiting wares at America House, which was a significant dealer of contemporary American craft in the New York area. And it had been established by Aileen Vanderbilt Webb. And so he began making pieces for sale at America House in Manhattan. And he would make all sorts of things. He would make boxes, he would make furniture, tables, but he would make ashtrays and candlesticks, and he wanted to meet all different price points. Now, at the height of his operation in Pennsylvania, he had some 90 people working in his factory, and that was in the mid-1970s. And he would make these pieces, which became quite popular among sort of fans of contemporary craft, by taking steel and then he would oxidize it. And he called the oxidation process, which is a chemical reaction between the steel body and then the sort of surface of the steel. He called oxidation the icing of a cake in working with metals. Now, he would also then weld together his patinated steel, and then he would apply paint, but he would also apply enamel. Actually, I think this is enamel, not paint. So he would apply enamel, and then he would apply bronze, and then he would also use gilt. And so we see the gold on the edge of these little steel pieces here. The piece is quite visually heavy, but it is also quite physically heavy. Mrs. Smith said that it was 2,000 pounds. I don't quite believe that, but I do believe that sort of 200 pounds per door. So how did it end up here? Now, Evans was very popular in New York and in America House, and he had his partners who were helping him marketing. But America House was also becoming increasingly influential. And so Paul Evans, who had been featured in the sort of major craft magazines of the day, like Craft Horizons, and other sort of taste-making magazines, America House began to have privately owned offshoots. And so there was one in Seattle, there was one in Iowa, and then there opened up an America's House in Birmingham, Michigan. So I don't know if any of you know knew America's House when it was still in operation. They were open from 1940 until the early 70s. And one evening, Sarah and Melvin Smithy were out at the Cranbrook Art Museum, and then they were going to drive down to Detroit to go and see the Renoir show at the DIA. Now, when they stopped for to look at the galleries in Birmingham along the way, and so they went into Englander Furniture, and then they turned the corner to go into the Birmingham version of America's House, and see this sort of great legacy that Mrs. Vanderbilt Webb had created. And they said there was a little crowd in the corner of America's House, and so they went over to see what all the hubbub was. And when the crowds parted, they saw this piece. And Mr. Smith had already been a big patron of America's House in Birmingham, and he had bought a lot of sort of small vessels and pieces, but he hadn't bought any major furniture. And so he sees the store manager, Joyce, and she says, "Isn't that piece perfect? It would be perfect for your house. That's what I thought when it came in." And Mr. Smith said, "I have to have it. I mean, it would be perfect in our Frank Lloyd Wright house. What's the price?" And she told him, and his sort of jaw hit the floor, and he looks at Sarah, and they're just like, "Well, there's no way we can afford that. Thanks for showing it to us." And so they drive down to the DIA, and Sarah says that all they did was talk about the Paul Evans chest. And she says that when she got to the museum, she was so surprised because it seemed like her husband always had a solution to any problem they faced, and yet he couldn't figure out how they were going to get this Paul Evans credenza. And so they're walking through the Renoir show, and then he suddenly is struck with the idea, and he thinks, why don't we just buy it on a payment plan? We'll buy it on layaway. Let's see if she'll accept that idea. And so they hightail it out of the DIA. They don't look at any of the show. They make it back to America's House before it closes. And as they're walking in, Joyce looks out the window, and they both nod their heads at each other. And they're like, "Yes, we're going to get this to your house." Now, I'm not sure exactly what year that was, but there are pictures of the chest in the house before the addition was. It was in the living room. And then it did become one of their very favorite pieces in the house. And it certainly anchors this room. Now, there are a few hundred of these that were made over time, but each one is pretty different. And like I said, he had some 90 people working in his factory. And so I think the way that the process would work would be sort of Paul Evans sketches out how these pieces will look generally. And then there is a selection of forms that would be advertised in the catalog. And then they were made sort of not made to order, but they just became a sort of serial production of handmade objects. Now, I said that we would look for a signature, and we will, but we'll also look inside. And the inside of ours is this really lovely red lacquer with thin felt shelves that are original. And then here you see on the back the way that the oxidized steel has this sort of same crusty effect on the back. I don't know why it looks crusty. I think so the like, I am not a metalsmith, by the way, but this layer of kind of, that is the weld that you're seeing. So it is both the way the piece is fabricated is creating the decorative effect. And I like that Evans, even though the Smiths did not own anything else by him, I like that he really thought about his designs in relation to the whole room. That's a very Cranbrook and Eliel Saarinen way of designing, would be to design not only the credenza, but also all of the implements that you would need for sort of dining at home. Now, these sort of attached with these brads metal panels lead us into Evans's sort of next phase of his career, when he would begin doing more smooth pieces that look more like riveted boxes. And then one of the last phases that he created before his business unfortunately went under was a series of aluminum and gold leaf pieces that are pretty much the most disco era, high polish kind of space age thing you could see. And those actually come up for auction fairly regularly and do not go for nearly as much as these earlier pieces. So I'm seeing no signature. Is it dusty? It is a little bit dusty. The whole piece does need to be cleaned and conserved, but we don't want to scrape away any of the gilding, and we wouldn't want to damage any of the finish. So it's probably something that, with a little bit of research and a chat with the conservator, Leslie, the registrar, and I could do, would be to take care of cleaning the piece. I don't know. I have not seen Paul Evans's name anywhere yet. I was really hopeful. So other pieces from the 70s we'll talk about in our tour on Sunday, and we won't have quite as much biographical information about Paul Evans on Sunday, but we will be discussing in our 70s tour of the Smith House some of the things that the Smiths were up to in the 70s, as well as other pieces that they collected of that most brown decade. Does anyone have any other questions as we take our single object live at 5, focusing on Paul Evans's magnificent welded, patinated, and oxidized steel credenza? And still no signature. The main dealer in Paul Evans, our dealers would be Todd Merrill's studio in New York, and then Wright Auction Houses in Chicago. So the next time they are here in Bloomfield Hills, maybe they can come out and tell me more about this extraordinary piece, an extraordinarily heavy piece. Now, Evans was not the healthiest individual, and though he was raised Quaker and everyone sort of known for being so nice and so invested in his factory workers, one thing he would do at Christmas was he would fill balloons up with all the bonuses, and then they would get handed a balloon, and when it popped, the money would fall out. But he did suffer heart attacks in his 50s, and he died at only the age of 55. So he had a very short life, but a fairly long career, a 30-year career, in no small part thanks to Mrs. Vanderbilt Webb and her patronage as both a student at RIT and then at her America House in New York. So, did the Smiths clean it? I don't know. And I don't know if Janet, the Smiths housekeeper, who is still our housekeeper, I have not talked to her about the cleaning policies of that particular piece. Perhaps I should have dusted it before we did a video tour of it, but that would be thinking 2 steps further ahead than I'm currently operating. I hope everyone is doing well, staying safe, wearing masks. We will be, as I mentioned, having the Doko Momo, the 70s Turn 50 special 70s tour of Smith House on Sunday. It's going to be broadcasting live from the Bolero Bowling Alley in Royal Oak, as well as from the Smith House here. And I will be doing a little lecture at the start about 70s architecture here in Southeast Michigan. So John Portman and the Renaissance Center, the Power Center at the University of Michigan, the Richard Meyer Douglas House, a number of really great 70s architectural landmarks. That is going to be Sunday afternoon. Tickets are still on sale at center.cranbrook.edu. And then in 2 weeks, we will be having another Uncovering Cranbrook lecture series that will be focused on Eero Saarinen and Yale. And so next week's Live at 5 will be all about Eero Saarinen. And so get excited for that event. Tickets are still on sale on the Cranbrook website. And I hope that you all have enjoyed this brief taste into the 70s at Smith House. It's kind of interesting to think of Frank Lloyd Wright as doing a 70s house because he, of course, died in 1959. But the Smiths were the original clients, and the house adapted as they grew into it. They never they never cleaned out the house. It's only had one owners, and so most of Mr. Smith's sort of aesthetics were locked in place by kind of 1980, and the house really reads as a 70s period piece, even though its design can trace straight back to really 1936 when Wright did his first Usonian house. It's a gorgeous day. I realized as I was reading about Paul Evans in the library at Cranbrook earlier today, why was I choosing to talk about a piece of furniture inside? But now I will put my camera down. I'm done for the day, and I will take a little walk around the neighborhood and appreciate the beautiful fall weather here in Southeast Michigan. Be well, everyone, and I will see you next Tuesday for another Instagram Live at 5. Oh, sorry to just use this for shameless promotion, but tomorrow's Live at 5 at Facebook is going to be really great. We are going to be touring the interior of head of metalsmithing Iris Eichenberg's house. And I have been there before. She has a stunning collection. She's in a little Eliel Saarinen building, faculty housing. You've probably never been into that side of Academy Way, and her house is spectacular. So make sure that you, if you're on Facebook, are there at 5 o'clock tomorrow for the Facebook Live at 5 tour of Iris Eichenberg, head of metalsmithing's residence. See you all next week or tomorrow or Sunday. So many opportunities to join in and connect with the center.